There were flashing lights outside, an ambulance in the driveway, and my father's oxygen machine, blinking red inside. I stood frozen in the doorway as Karen from the HOA bellowed at a paramedic. He was too loud. "I have rights." And then I heard it. The machine had been unplugged. "Ma'am, the words trailed off into a stunned silence that echoed in my ears. In that single, harrowing moment, the boundaries between personal tragedy and petty neighborhood squabbles blurred into something far more dangerous. My dad had depended on his oxygen machine for years, a lifeline in his twilight years that allowed him to breathe steadily despite his failing lungs. Now, because of a noise complaint that Karen had lodged with a ferocity only she could muster, our family was thrown into chaos. The ambulance's lights danced across the freshly fallen snow, and every siren's wail punctuated the disbelief and anger that churned inside me. I couldn't fathom how a trivial grievance about excessive noise could escalate to such a level. Karen had always been notorious for her over-the-top enforcement of community rules in our gated suburb of Silver Pines. But this was different. Unplugging a critical medical device was not just a breach of decorum. It was a callous, life-threatening act that would soon demand accountability from the law. As the paramedics scrambled to reconnect the machine and restore my father's oxygen supply, I realized that what had begun as a petty squabble had spiraled into a crisis with dire consequences. In that moment, the flashing lights, the frantic voices, and the grim red display on the oxygen monitor converged into a single, unyielding truth. No one, not even an overzealous HOA enforcer like Karen, had the right to endanger a life over a noise complaint. And as I watched her rant, oblivious to the real impact of her actions, I knew that our family's fight for justice was only just beginning. Today, Karen's rigid sense of entitlement would collide with the law, and the outcome would be irrevocable. Silver Pines was a gated community built on the promise of pristine order and refined living. Every house in the neighborhood was a model of uniform perfection. Identical manicured lawns, stately homes with trim facades, and a rigorous adherence to the rules laid down by the local homeowners association, HOA. It was a place where deviation was frowned upon, and the guardians of conformity took their roles very seriously. At the heart of this regime was Karen Miller, known to all as HOA Karen. In her early 50s, Karen prided herself on her unyielding commitment to the community's standards. With her impeccably tailored outfits, a clipboard always at the ready, and a smartphone glued to her ear, she patrolled Silver Pines like a self-appointed sheriff. No detail escaped her notice. If a hedge was slightly overgrown, or if a door was painted in a shade that didn't match the approved palette, Karen was there to file a complaint. For her, the community was her kingdom, and she was its uncompromising enforcer. I, on the other hand, had grown up on the outskirts of Silver Pines and eventually inherited our family home. A modest property with sprawling acres that bore the marks of hard work and a fiercely independent spirit. My father, a gentle man with a resilient heart, had built a small haven here despite the pressures of suburban conformity. Our home was a sanctuary where creativity, tradition, and personal freedom were valued above the rigid dictates of the HOA. One of our most cherished possessions was my father's oxygen machine, a lifeline that allowed him to maintain his independence despite his failing health. For years, my family's way of life had existed in a quiet tension with the norms of Silver Pines. While many neighbors adhered strictly to the HOA's expectations, we clung to our individuality, even if it sometimes put us at odds with the community's gatekeepers. I ran a small family business from our home, and our modest properties stand as a testament to self-reliance, creativity, and the belief that life should be lived on one's own terms. Yet it was this very spirit of independence that had often drawn the ire of HOA Karen. She had fined us on more than one occasion for unauthorized modifications and aesthetic deviations, trivial matters that we dismissed as petty bureaucratic overreach. But nothing could have prepared us for what came next, a noise complaint that would escalate beyond our worst nightmares. On that fateful day, what began as Karen's protest over a few extra decibels of sound at our property exploded into a confrontation with far graver consequences. By turning off my father's oxygen, a device he depended on to breathe, Karen had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. This was not just about rules and fines. It was about life and death, about the rights of a vulnerable man and the audacity of an individual who believed she could impose her will on others without accountability. As the community watched the flashing lights of the ambulance and the chaos unfold outside our home, it became painfully clear that the law was coming for Karen. And I knew that our family's fight for justice was about to change the very fabric of Silver Pines forever. The fallout from that fateful 911 call rippled through Silver Pines with astonishing speed. I spent that agonizing hour collecting evidence. Video footage from our security cameras, timestamps documenting the precise moment my father's oxygen machine blinked red, and witness statements from neighbors who had seen Karen's furious confrontation with the paramedics. Every bit of evidence painted a damning picture of an HOA enforcer who had taken her role far too far. I immediately submitted my findings to both the local authorities and the HOA board. My complaint was unequivocal. Karen Miller's actions had endangered a life, and there would be no toleration for such reckless abuse of power. I knew that the board had a history of rubber-stamping her fines and complaints, but this incident was different. The gravity of turning off an oxygen machine on a man already struggling to breathe could not be ignored. Within hours, discussions erupted on community forums and social media. Neighbors, many of whom had long harbored resentment against the oppressive policies of the HOA, rallied around my story. Hashtags like #OxygenForDad and #KarenExposed began trending locally. Supportive messages flooded in from residents who recalled their own experiences with Karen's overzealous enforcement. Some even recounted instances when minor issues were blown out of proportion by her unyielding attitude. The digital evidence was compelling, and soon the community's collective outrage transformed my personal tragedy into a broader call for accountability. In the days that followed, the pressure on the HOA board mounted. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, and heated debates filled the corridors of the board's office. Some members argued that Karen's actions were simply a misunderstanding of community noise levels, insisting that she had a right to file complaints. Others, however, pointed out that the safety of residents must always come first, and that no amount of community standards could justify the endangerment of a man's life. The board was split, and the tension was palpable. Meanwhile, local law enforcement began to investigate the incident. Officers arrived at our home to interview us and to examine the security footage. The investigation quickly confirmed what we all feared. Karen had deliberately turned off the oxygen machine, a move that not only violated our rights as property owners, but also constituted a serious breach of public safety. The case was escalating, and it wasn't long before whispers spread that legal action would be imminent. My father, though frail and frightened by the ordeal, maintained his dignity through it all. He knew that the battle we were fighting wasn't just for him. It was for every resident in Silver Pines who believed that the law should protect individuals, not empower tyrants. I took it upon myself to speak at neighborhood meetings, to share our story, and to urge everyone to stand together against arbitrary rule enforcement. I emphasized that no one should have to suffer because one person decided to impose her will on others without accountability. As the investigation deepened, I began receiving advice from legal experts and community activists. They assured me that my case was strong and that the evidence would compel the authorities to act. My digital dossier, meticulously compiled over those frantic hours, had become the backbone of our movement, a symbol of the fight for justice in a community too long silenced by petty fines and unchecked power. Karen, for her part, initially tried to downplay the incident. In a series of defensive statements posted on social media, she claimed that her 911 call was motivated by concern for public safety and that she was merely enforcing the rules. But every statement was swiftly refuted by the overwhelming evidence. As the public outcry grew louder, it became clear that Karen's actions were not only unethical, they were criminal. The conflict had now reached a boiling point. The community was divided. some loyal to the outdated regime of the HOA, and others determined to reclaim their rights. For me, the personal stakes were higher than ever. My father's life had been put at risk by an overzealous enforcer, and I was resolved to ensure that such injustice would not be tolerated, not in Silver Pines and not anywhere else. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown. I prepared to take my case to the local courts and to confront the HOA board in a final public hearing. I gathered every piece of digital evidence, every testimonial, and every legal opinion I could find. My goal was clear: to hold Karen Miller accountable and to force a comprehensive review of the HOA's policies. The battle for justice had begun, and I knew that the coming days would decide not just the fate of my family, but the future of our entire community. In the wake of the investigation, Silver Pines erupted with controversy. The digital evidence I had compiled was shared widely, and local social media exploded with heated debates about property rights and the abuse of authority. Hashtags such as hashtag Karen Exposed, hashtag Oxygen Rights, and hashtag Justice for Silver Pines began trending, and soon even regional news outlets picked up the story. Reporters interviewed shocked neighbors and local officials, and the narrative quickly shifted from a minor dispute to a full-blown scandal. The HOA board, now under immense pressure, convened emergency meetings. Leaked minutes revealed that many board members were troubled by the implications of Karen's actions. How can we allow someone to jeopardize a resident's life over a noise complaint? One member was overheard saying. Others argued that strict enforcement was necessary for maintaining order. But as the evidence mounted, it became increasingly difficult to justify Karen's behavior. The board's unity began to crumble, and whispers of reform grew louder. Local law enforcement stepped up their efforts. Officers were seen patrolling the community more frequently, and a special task force was reportedly formed to investigate the misuse of emergency services in Silver Pines. The police department issued a stern warning. Any further abuse of public safety protocols would be met with swift legal action. The investigation into my father's case became a rallying point for residents who had long felt oppressed by arbitrary fines and intrusive enforcement. I continued to document every development. Daily updates on my community forum featured new clips from the security cameras, detailed logs of every interaction, and supportive messages from neighbors. One particularly compelling video showed a local resident recounting how they had been fined for a minor infraction, an experience that now resonated with everyone who had been similarly victimized. If we let this slide, the resident said, then no one's rights are safe. The collective sentiment was clear. We demanded accountability and a re-examination of the HOA's policies. As the legal proceedings loomed, I began organizing peaceful protests. Neighbors gathered outside the HOA office with signs reading, "Oxygen is life," and "Stop Karen's tyranny." The protests were calm but resolute, a visible demonstration of our united stand against a system that had long stifled our freedoms. The digital petition against Karen's actions gathered thousands of signatures, and local influencers and activists joined the movement, amplifying our message across social media platforms. Karen Miller, meanwhile, tried to salvage her reputation. She posted video messages apologizing for any inconvenience her actions might have caused and insisting that her intentions were purely to maintain community standards. But every attempt at damage control was met with a flood of counter-evidence. Screenshots of the unplugged oxygen machine, security footage of her aggressive behavior, and expert testimonies confirming that her actions were not only unnecessary but dangerous. The public's response was swift and unforgiving. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments, many calling for her to be held accountable under the law. The pressure on the HOA board intensified further when local lawmakers began to take notice. A prominent state representative, known for championing individual rights, publicly denounced the misuse of emergency services and arbitrary fines in Silver Pines. His statement, broadcast on local television, declared that any actions compromising public safety would not be tolerated and that strict legal measures would be implemented if necessary. This official endorsement of our cause sent ripples through the community, adding a powerful voice to our demands for justice. In the midst of this escalating tension, I prepared for the final public hearing, a showdown that promised to be the culmination of months of struggle. I met with legal advisors, reviewed every piece of evidence once more, and coordinated with fellow residents who planned to attend the hearing in droves. The digital dossier I had painstakingly assembled was now the cornerstone of our movement, a testament to the fact that no one's life or property should be compromised by arbitrary enforcement. As the day of the hearing approached, every corner of Silver Pines buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors shared updates, debated online, and expressed their support for a future free from the tyranny of individuals like Karen Miller. The collective voice of the community was a powerful force, a force that would soon force the HOA board to confront the reality of their own policies and the consequences of allowing personal vendettas to override common sense. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Silver Pines Community Center. The room was filled with a mix of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of resolute residents, all gathered to witness the final public hearing that would determine the future of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm yet unyielding demeanor, Councilwoman Teresa Ramirez stepped up to the podium, her eyes filled with the hope and determination of a community that had had enough. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs of the incident, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Ramirez began, her voice clear and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her decision to turn off my father's oxygen and her subsequent misuse of emergency services, were not motivated by legitimate concerns for community safety, but by personal bias and an abuse of power. Our community's trust in the HOA's ability to enforce rules fairly has been shattered, and we must act decisively. A heavy silence fell over the room as Ramirez continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions and fines imposed as a result of this incident, and we will initiate a comprehensive disciplinary review of the policies and practices that allowed such an egregious breach of individual rights. Furthermore, new guidelines will be established to ensure that every resident's right to life, property, and personal freedom is upheld. Today's decision is not merely about reversing a fine. It is a resounding declaration that Silver Pines will no longer tolerate the abuse of power, no matter who wields it. Her words resonated deeply, and murmurs of approval rippled throughout the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate, known for his unwavering defense of individual freedoms, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should have to suffer because one person's overzealous enforcement jeopardizes the safety and dignity of our community. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our rights are non-negotiable and that any abuse of power will be met with swift and decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a powerful call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local law enforcement office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports confirming that the oxygen machine had been deliberately unplugged and that Karen Miller's actions were a direct violation of public safety standards. The evidence was irrefutable, and the Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against anyone found responsible for this abuse of power. The full report was scheduled for immediate public release, ensuring complete transparency. Councilwoman Ramirez concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Silver Pines, a community where every resident's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised with integrity and fairness. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms, that we will stand against arbitrary interference, and that we will not allow personal vendettas to dictate the lives of our citizens. Together, we stand for justice, accountability, and the inalienable right to live safely and freely on our own terms." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for justice and public safety. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Silver Pines. The days of arbitrary rule enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Silver Pines underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly throughout local media and on social networks, igniting passionate debates about property rights, public safety, and individual freedom. Editorials in a local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Silver Pines" and "Community United for Justice," celebrated the decisive action taken to protect the rights of every resident. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreAbuse, and #CommunityJustice trended widely, reinforcing the community's unwavering commitment to stand against arbitrary interference. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences and to envision a future free from the oppressive grip of personal vendettas. Neighbors who had long lived in fear of intrusive fines and arbitrary enforcement now spoke openly about their right to live and work on their own terms. Our homes, our lives, and our very safety are not negotiable, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his words echoing through the crowded hall. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Silver Pines would always honor the principles of justice and personal freedom. Within the reformed HOA board and local law enforcement, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focused on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint was rigorously scrutinized and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or dangerous overreach. Our duty is to protect every citizen's rights and dignity, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the renewed commitment to fairness and accountability. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized to empower residents further. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about the importance of safeguarding public safety and property rights. When we stand together, our voices have the power to reshape our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite and demand a more equitable system of governance. For me, the journey from personal tragedy to community triumph was both deeply moving and transformative. My decision to confront the reckless actions of HOA Karen Miller and to expose the dangerous consequences of her overreach had not only restored my father's dignity and our family's safety, but it also ignited a movement that resonated throughout Silver Pines. Neighbors, long oppressed by the fear of arbitrary fines and punitive measures, found their voices and shared their own stories of injustice. The digital evidence that had once captured that fateful morning became a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of life and the right to live free from the tyranny of unchecked authority. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the urgent need for reform and the dangers inherent in absolute power. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Silver Pines, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Justice" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate the triumph of our collective voice over tyranny, a victory for every citizen who believes in safety, justice, and the right to live without fear of arbitrary interference. Councilwoman Ramirez proclaimed, her voice echoing with unwavering conviction. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our community's renewed spirit and commitment to protecting our freedoms. As each new day dawned over Silver Pines, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Miller's reckless noise complaint led her to turn off my father's oxygen, and how the law eventually came calling, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that the sanctity of life and property rights were non-negotiable. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Silver Pines, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle against an overzealous enforcer evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the enduring promise that Silver Pines would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for every individual's rights shone as brightly as the morning light.